Good morning, good evening. How the devil are you folks doing today? So, let's bring on my co-host, Miss Sophia. What's up?
Hey, what's going on in the neighborhood?
It's all good, man. Everything is everything. Um, but yeah, man, I've been looking forward to the show. Been having a lot of interesting conversations over the week. Trying to line guests up that we can maybe interview in the future, possibly, and a lot of stuff like that. But I wanted to really get into today's topic, man, because we're talking about how idealism actually relates to current events, like whether it be political events or social events or whatever the case is. A lot of people um, don't understand idealism, first of all, like as just as a concept, and so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit to kind of set the stage on that conversation by sort of defining idealism as we understand it, and some of the things that we entertain as an idea, as concepts, and it helps us relate to the world in an entirely maybe unique way than a lot of other
Yes.
people may.
I just
But
wanted to say I really
yeah,
love this new background. It's just like we're riding the wave.
I know, right? Yeah, we're on a trip, man. That's what it is. We're on a trip in reality. So, I've been talking a lot with quite a few different people. Joel Davis, for one, and then some other folks as well, about causation and how that relates to idealism, because causation is related to this whole thing about the arrow of time and entropy, and it kind of relates to a lot of that stuff. So I just wanted to say, and I might play a little bit of a video from Sean Carroll, who does a much better way of explaining all of these concepts and ideas. But basically, the way I understand it is that the arrow of time is not built into the laws of physics. We simply experience the arrow of time because we are in the vicinity of like an aftermath of some influential event, like say the Big Bang, right? And so the
Mhm.
Big Bang started at a very low entropy state, and no one knows why. But as entropy increases over time, we start to see as human observers this arrow of time. Now, how does this explain the feeling of the flowing through time? Well, from what I understand, we live in a world where we don't really fight against entropy, but we actually work within the natural system that we call entropy. So we, as living biological systems, we may have like started at a very low entropy state billions of years ago, like say like a hydrothermal vent under the ocean, right?
Mhm.
And then this vent was like a complex chemical structure, a soup, if you will, that existed for a long time and evolved. And then eventually, because of entropy, it broke apart and caused, the beginnings of life. The growth of entropy led to evolved systems that eventually led to us humans. So we are actually things that persist as objects in a world by being stationary, or because of microstasis, right? That stillness. And then homeostasis sort of describes a moving pattern. So we are kind of like that moving pattern that maintains over time by balancing that stillness of the microstasis, while, ATPs like our food, the sun, water, energy from the environment, all of these processes require entropy to keep us maintained as a system. So we need sun, food, water, etc. And the sun gives us energy in, like, say, low entropy form. And we as humans, we radiate the same energy out with a much higher entropy. So this entropy increase gives us the experience of time flowing forward, because we have like a vague knowledge of our state of any given time, right? Like we have an image of where we are presently or where our body is right now. And we also carry a memory of
Oh,
where our body was in the past. And then we can project into the future a prediction, a plan. And we're constantly
mhm.
updating this information and we're making these comparisons. We're making sense of the world. So this gives us the feeling of time passing. So it's an impression that animals like humans have. We're just really good at planning and predicting for different possible futures. And so time is a concept we really gravitate to. So we sort of evolved to think about the possible ways we could or should react to possible situations. So we humans use our future visions and simulations in order to evolve and adapt to an ever changing environment. I think scientists call it mental time travel, right? And so, but all this stuff is not fundamental. It's just how it appears to us as observers in the world. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting. I'll actually let Sean Carroll describe it because he's a lot better at it. So let me see if I can share the screen and we'll bring Miss Sophia back. Let's bring her back first. Uh-oh. Let me bring Miss Sophia back to the stage and we're going to watch this video.
My bad. You know, I got project internet going on here.
You got Obama, what is it? Obama phone?
No, I got a good phone and everything, but it's the whole neighborhood. Like it's the only people that have bad internet is in the, where the Nicklets are. they don't.
Oh,
They
yeah,
gave
yeah,
us
yeah.
one. They gave us one tower and said that's enough. That's all y'all
Yeah.
gonna get.
That's all they get to have. They don't deserve no real internet. Y'all got great value. You got great value internet, man.
Yeah, we got the crack value cracking tower.
Yeah, you got great value tower.
Oh shit.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and play this video though.
The hard part is, if you have a medium entropy system, why was it lower entropy in the past? If it started lower entropy, you can explain why, but you seem to need a new principle to explain that. And indeed, that is exactly true. Think of the arrow of time this way. There's no arrow of space, right? If you were an astronaut floating out there in space, there'd be no difference between up, down, left, right, forward, backward. But if you're here on Earth, there's an arrow of space. You can tell the difference between up and down. Nobody thinks that arrow of space is deeply ingrained in the fundamental nature of reality. It's just because you're in the vicinity of an influential object, the Earth. The same story is true for the arrow of time. The arrow of time, according to modern physics, is not built into the fundamental nature of reality. We experience it because we live in the aftermath of an influential event, the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago. For reasons that cosmologists do not understand, the Big Bang was very low entropy. The early universe was very orderly compared to what it could have been. Now, why is that true? Good question. Very active research question at the frontiers of modern cosmology. But for our purposes today, we don't know why. But it's true. The Big Bang had a low entropy. And once you say that, it's clear that entropy is going to go up. It's been going up for the last 14 billion years. It's going to continue to go up billions and billions of years into the future. So good. We think we know what entropy is, the number of ways you can rearrange a system. We think it makes sense that entropy increases over time. What we're left to do is understand what this has to do with our experience of time in the everyday world. How does that help explain this asymmetry we have about the past versus the future? This feeling that we have that we're flowing through time. Well, let's just take one example. Here's my favorite example of an asymmetry. This is an asymmetry of prediction versus records. You're walking down the street, you look down the sidewalk, you see a broken egg. And we ask ourselves, because we're in a philosophical mood, what is the future of that egg likely to hold? You don't know, right? There's many different possible things that could happen to the egg. It could just sit there. It could be cleaned up by somebody. There could be a rainstorm washing it away. There's many possible futures open. But if you asked yourself, what does the past of that egg probably involve? With very high confidence, you will believe that there used to be an unbroken egg and it got dropped and it broke. So right away, just seeing this thing in the world right now, this artifact, broken egg on the sidewalk, you infer a difference between the past history of that egg and the future history of that egg. Why? Well, it's not because of the fundamental laws of physics. Given the configuration today, egg on the ground, messy, etc., there are many, many arrangements of the individual molecules that could account for that. And accordingly, there are many, many possible futures. As we said, many things could happen to the egg. If all you knew were the fundamental laws of physics, there is a precisely equal number of past things that the egg could have gone through. The conservation of information convinces us that the number of past possible histories of that egg is exactly equal to the number of future possible histories of that egg. But there is one big difference, that we know the universe started with the Big Bang, and that Big Bang had a very low entropy. This is what philosophers call the past hypothesis of low entropy in the universe. So we know two things. We know the current state of the egg, and we know the initial condition that we started with very low entropy. That's where the imbalance comes from. That's where we know a little bit something more about the past than about the future. And we can use that information to say, given the existence of a broken egg on the sidewalk today and the existence of a very, very low entropy Big Bang, we can infer that there used to be an unbroken egg. As you go through your life, as you are remembering things and predicting things about the future, you are constantly relying on the fact that the entropy of the universe was very low near the Big Bang. You might not have known that you are relying on that fact, but it's crucially important to how we live our lives. That's the good news. We can say something about where this asymmetry comes from, this asymmetry of both knowledge and influence toward the past and the future. But it raises kind of another worry that we didn't have before, which is the following. If all that happens over the history of the universe is that disorder increases, how did I get here? I think of myself as relatively orderly, right? The organs of my body, the neurons in my brain, they're organized in kind of a precise way. How could you tell me that something as exquisitely organized as a living being just came to exist out of increasing entropy over time? And of course, because I'm asking you this question, that I know what the answer is to this. At least I know a little bit. This is another active research area. But let's go back to our favorite example of the cream mixing into coffee. It begins in a very low entropy state. The cream and the coffee mix together. It ends up in a high entropy state. But that early low entropy state is very simple, right? All the cream's on the top, all the coffee's on the bottom. That final high entropy state is also very simple. Everything's mixed together. It's in between. It's that intermediate state on the journey from low entropy to high entropy where things look complicated, where the cream and the coffee are mixing together in unpredictable ways, forming little swirls, little fractal patterns that would require a lot of information to specify. So that's the secret. And we have a lot to learn still to go about this, but basically, complexity naturally arises on the journey from low entropy to high entropy. This is we think, a fundamental feature of how the universe works, that there's something about the journey from a simple beginning with very, very low entropy to a simple ending with very, very high entropy that can give rise to complexity. So entropy just goes up, but complexity first goes up and then goes down. It's a temporary phenomenon, which might make you pleased to understand what's going on, maybe a little worried about the ephemeral nature of things like that in the universe. And indeed, this is not just a story about cream and coffee. This is a story we can tell about the universe as a whole. The Big Bang was about 14 billion years ago. And right after the Big Bang, the universe was very low entropy, also very simple. It was hot, dense, smooth, rapidly expanding. That's all you need to know. Over time, what happens is the universe expands and cools, and structures begin to form. Gravity pulls things together, and we can see this. We can take an image of the background radiation from the Big Bang from a few 100,000 years after the beginning. You can see the first faint traces of structures forming. Today, 14 billion years later, our universe is rich with structures. There are planets, stars, galaxies, people, clusters, voids. It's a very lumpy, interesting, exciting kind of universe. But that's temporary. It's not going to last forever. Stars use up their fuel. They burn out. They go dark. Stars fall into black holes. Even black holes don't last forever. In the 1970s, Stephen Hawking taught us black holes radiate out into the universe and eventually evaporate away completely. We think, roughly speaking, that 10 to the 100 years from now, which is a long time even by long now standards, all of the black holes in the universe will have evaporated away into almost nothing. We think that the universe is expanding and it's going to keep expanding forever. We don't know that for sure. Remember, predicting the future is hard, but that's the best current theory we have. So the very far future of the universe is very high entropy, but once again, very, very simple. We, for what it's worth, live in the exciting part of the history of the universe.
Yeah. So we can observe all this stuff, as observers, but like you said, this entropy arrow of time, it's not fundamental. It's just how it appears to us as beings that are relational to what happened from the Big Bang on forward. But um, what do you think, man, especially about the black hole scenario? That's really interesting. We start talking about the holographic universe and all of this kind of stuff. What do you think?
I don't understand that too well, to be honest, because the way I see it, it's like entropy is like trying to fit more complexity or consciousness into the simulation, so to speak. And the more like consciousness is just too vast. And that's why I believe we have entropy. Like the more that it expands, it kind of busts or cracks at the seams. And then the leakage is entropy, if that makes any sense.
That's interesting. Is there any way you can explain that? How that works? That's
well,
cool,
that's my explanation. Like I have a
Oh,
weird
okay.
kind of mind. And
Okay.
and that's my explanation. Like let's say like after the Big Bang, there were just simple organisms and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that in my frequency model, that's consciousness expressing itself, right? But then
Right,
as it
right, right, right.
expands and gets bigger and bigger, so to speak, right? The entropy increases. That's why, for example, you might have a tree that how old can trees get? Trees can get like extremely old, right?
Like 10,000 years old or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, but a human being has an average lifespan of what, 70 something years?
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying. The more complex that consciousness expresses itself, the more it overflows the cup, so to
Oh,
speak.
yeah. That makes sense. Gotcha.
I know that
Okay.
sounds crazy, y'all. I'm weird.
But it kind of does make sense though, because you've just got so many things to manage and maintain. So obviously it would be a bit harder to maintain a being that was more complex than one that wasn't, unless you could feed energy into the system.
Exactly.
But that kind of goes into a little bit of our topic today, like how it relates to like current events, because we can look at it from a scientific way and we can say, okay, so some of the things we experience, or probably everything we experience, doesn't really reflect objective reality as it is. It just reflects a very real appearance that we live through, each and every one of us, subjectively and intersubjectively as well. But like we deal with a lot of things like the political climate, our social spheres and environment. And so how does idealism actually relate, or how can it relate to like these things? Like say we were talking about neoliberalism. and I know you had a lot to say about that. So I wanted to kind of get into that. What is neoliberalism, first of all?
Well, neoliberalism is definitely very different from liberalism. And a lot of people think it's like the same thing or whatever, but it's really not. And in my frequency model, neoliberalism kind of represents a false conscious frequency field. In other words, we're under the illusion that we have free will. You know, we're told if we do the right thing, we're going to get a good reward, you know, and we find out that that's not really the case, that we're just kind of on a hamster wheel going in circles. And that's what neoliberalism is. And neoliberalism focuses on basically giving power, using the government to enforce corporation power, rather than give power to the people. And liberalism is more about that, giving power to the people, having less government interference, and things like that. And neoliberalism poses as that, but it really isn't. You see what I'm saying?
I'm just going to read this from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It says neoliberalism, though not all scholars agree on the meaning of the term, neoliberalism is now generally thought to label the philosophical view that a society's political and economic institutions should be robustly liberal and capitalist, but supplemented by a constitutionally limited democracy and a modest welfare state. Recent work on neoliberalism, thus understood, shows this to be a coherent and distinctive political philosophy. This entry explicates neoliberalism by examining the political concepts, principles, and policies shared by F.A. Hayek, Milton Friedman, and James Buchanan, all of whom play leading roles in the new historical research on neoliberalism, and all of whom wrote in political philosophy as well as political economy. Identifying common themes in their work provides an illuminating picture of neoliberalism as a coherent political doctrine. So I guess from what this is saying, it's supposed to be like a political and economic institution, or rather, I said that all wrong. It's a view that a society's political and economic institution should be liberal and capitalist with a modest welfare state. So
That's what
is
it. That's
what
what
you're
it's. That's what it says about neoliberalism.
yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna read something that I have here to get
Okay.
some clarity on this. Okay, so
Okay.
liberalism versus neoliberalism: the illusion of freedom in a market cage. At a glance, the term liberalism and neoliberalism sounds like variations of the same theme. Both invoke freedom, individual rights, and limited government, but their true meanings are worlds apart. Liberalism, born in the Enlightenment, was a revolutionary call for civil liberties, representative democracy, and the protection of individual rights against tyranny. So that's liberalism. But neoliberalism, by contrast, is not a continuation of liberalism. It's hollowed out doppelganger, dressed in freedom's clothing, but driven by market domination. So you see where the difference is? So
Mm-hmm.
liberalism champions the rule of law, freedom of speech, checks and balances, and mixed economy, where markets coexist with a social safety net. Think John Locke, FDR's New Deal, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right?
Uh-huh.
Liberalism seeks to balance individual freedom with the common good, empowering citizens through public institutions like education, healthcare, and labor protections. Now, neoliberalism, on the other hand, um, emerged in the late 20th century with a very different mission: to make market logic supreme. Under neoliberalism, society itself is recognized to resemble a marketplace. Realize they said resemble. Public goods are privatized, social welfare is slashed, and democratic governance is reduced to consumer choice. The human being is no longer a citizen, but a customer. Freedom is reframed not as the right to dignity or equality, but as the freedom to compete, consume, and own. So make no mistake, we're living under neoliberalism. While we're told we live in a free and fair democracy, but like it's kind of self-evident. We're all thrown into this world of competition. You know, everybody lives for the dollar. Everybody.
I see. I see. Hey, Caleb, how you doing, man?
Doing great. I'm enjoying the discussion so far. Yeah.
What do you think about
Hey.
neoliberalism?
I I don't want to get too deep into it because you know, as someone who is a libertarian socialist, it's like there's a lot I could pick apart with neoliberalism. So I'll just say this: is that I think it was a terrible mistake to have like the center of our values be this materialistic world where the only thing that matters is the dollar amount.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, you know, idealism, you know, can be viewed from a practical standpoint, like anything that leads to, you know, the vision. Like at its core, neoliberalism is driven by the belief that free markets are the most efficient way to allocate resources and create wealth. In some ways, just at face value, this belief may align with some idealistic views of human nature, suggesting like we as individuals, when we're given freedom to pursue our own interests, we're ultimately going to contribute to the greater good. You know, like progress, like neoliberalism sometimes emphasizes progress and development. And this aligns with the idealistic view of human history as a story of continuous improvement, you know, and always trying to progress and respect and really work towards the end of well-being. You know, that's really what the idealistic values are. And it seems like on face value, that's what neoliberalism is trying to say. But what Sophia is pointing out is that it seems like it really took a different direction. Hey, Arlindo, how you doing, man?
How's it going? You're right, yeah?
Hey.
I just about watched the Sean Carroll video about entropy.
Yeah.
And now I'm watching you two talk about neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess you guys have
how in the hell did we do that?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
We got some ADHD up in here. That's all.
Yeah, man. I'm trying to connect some concepts. Like, I guess what I'm trying to do with that is to say, you know, like even in science, like our basic understanding about the physical world is an appearance rather than a fundamental, considered like a fundamental aspect of reality. It's more like an appearance in consciousness. And so, you know, we kind of like
neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Neoliberalism is also an appearance, but it's completely false, based on a false frequency, conscious frequency.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where she's tying in the model she has, you know, the LFM model. And really, we're trying, you know, because a lot of times people are like saying, well, what is the real value of idealism? Like, who cares? You know, you're saying that the fundamental thing is mind or whatever. It seems like materialism would have more of an impact on that because, you know, you're looking at making money, you know, trying to make a difference in the physical world, you know, progress. It seems like materialism is more, has a pathway to that. But what we're trying to say is no, actually idealism has a really big pathway to well-being, to you know, visions, ideals, you know, of what a good society would be, and so forth.
Because neoliberalism presents itself as natural and inevitable. That's the lie. That's the lie they kind of sell, right? Oh, that's just how humans are, and that's just how it works, and it's inevitable and it's natural. It's passed off as being natural in the same way that they say naturally materialism
Right.
is the
Well,
foundation.
I mean, if I feel like it's the same song that like feudal lords told their peasants. This is just the natural order of things.
Right.
Right. Right. And we're saying as idealists, no, the hell it ain't.
Yeah.
It seems to me that I was just going to say, it seems to me that materialism emphasizes the materials that we can own, like possessions, physical possessions, whereas idealism is more concerned with experience, and you know that can be personal
And
experience or
interaction.
group experience, yeah, and interaction. So in America, you guys have kind of like a laissez-faire government. You know, you're free to do whatever you want. You're free to achieve whatever you want. You're free to dream, to have visions, to go on business enterprises, to compete. But then again, I'm not so sure that people are as equal as they make out to be. And when I say this, I'm not trying to say that people don't have the potential to improve their condition or their situation. Obviously, we can all make progress as individuals,
Right.
but I think some people are more adept at certain things than others. I mean, we all have a knack for different things. So it seems to me that in order for us to have a democracy, inevitably we're going to run into a meritocracy, where we would rather elect people who know exactly what they're doing in certain fields of knowledge.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, do you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah.
It seems to me that, you know, we are not, people are at different levels, and depending on the context in which they find themselves in. For example, I probably wouldn't be the best person to go to a science convention and talk about, you know, dark energy. You know, that would be best suited for someone like Sean Carroll. You see, but that doesn't mean that I can't really knuckle down and try and learn more about, you know, theories
Right.
about dark energy and you know, cosmic inflation and all that. But yeah, one thing that Sean Carroll said about entropy is that there was it began from order, wasn't it, or a
Yeah.
non-entropic state,
Right.
which to me fits in with my notion of a pleroma, of an infinite pleroma, full of possibilities, and it's perfect. And from that, you can derive finite entropic universes or
Right.
versions of reality that lack the
Thank you.
holistic information. Yeah. So
Thank
there
you.
you go.
That's exactly what I've been saying for so long. And it's like a lot of this stuff
Now,
seems
can y'all break this
contradictory
down
for some
layman
reason.
terms?
Yeah, so it's like, you know, how we talk about the field of reality or being, or you can call it a quantum field or whatever, a field where there's nothing but infinite potential. That's
Yeah.
just the most simplest state you can be in. You know,
Right.
that's like the simplest
So
thing you can be.
the egg comes first. The unbroken
Yeah.
egg comes first, and now what we're seeing is the egg splattered all over the place,
Right.
and it continues to get splattered, and it's very complex. But then the complexity will be eventually reduced to a very simplistic state, and I guess that will be the cold death of the universe that physics
Right.
predicts. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's what
Yeah.
Sophia was saying before about the
Exactly.
consciousness. And see this, and this goes back to what I was saying. It's like actually when we experience this, all this entropy, like we are the egg splattered. You know, we're like in that situation. That's
Yeah.
why we can look to the past and see one state. We see our present state, and then we can infer a future state because we're in this whole process of entropy. But remember, it all started as a very simple potential. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, all we're doing is we're experiencing the potential. manifest itself. That's all we're doing.
Developing it, building on it, and it just goes on and on and on and on.
Right.
I
Whether it
explained
really
this to my
happens or not, it's
15-year-old
not
son.
fundamental. Yeah, you were saying that.
Right.
Yeah.
He just gets it naturally. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm breaking up.
I was going to say, have you guys heard of Scott Adams, the cartoonist, Scott Adams?
Nuh-uh.
He was the author of Dilbert, the comics about free will. He actually wrote a book called God's Debris, and it's supposed to be a fiction, right? But with a caveat, it actually expresses a theory, or more like a hypothesis, which is rooted in pandeism. So basically, in the beginning, there was only God, and God wasn't omniscient. He was omniscient, apart from this one question that he had that he couldn't answer. He thought, if I wish to kill myself, will I succeed? So if say is like all powerful, omnipotent, apparently, supposedly omnipotent, omniscient, but he doesn't know the answer to one question, right? Can he self-destruct? And the possibilities you can imagine, if he can, then it means he's not eternal, he's not immortal, but he's all powerful, right? But if he can't, that means he's eternal, he's immortal, but is not all powerful because he can't self-destruct, right? So in the story, in God's Debris, basically it's a dialogue between a young atheist and a wise old man, and the wise old man says to him, I used to be an atheist like you, but we all go through levels. As human beings, we go through levels of understanding. I can't remember. I think that's what he calls it. And basically, you go through the age of innocence first. You believe everything that people tell you. You believe your parents, and then you go through the rebellious stage, and then you embrace science. You move away from mysticism and religion, and then eventually, you get to level 5, which is where the level that the wise old man is at. So the young atheist is at level 4. He believes that science has the answers to everything. But the old man says to him, at level 5, you realize that even science is a belief system, and it can solve many riddles. It can predict many things, but ultimately it can't give you the answers to the secret of existence.
Right.
And so the old man says to him, in the beginning, there was only God.
No, it just tells you what's happening.
Yeah, and basically God wanted to answer that question.
It only tells.
Oh, I think she broke up there.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
I was just going to add, it just tells you what's happening in the laboratory, basically.
Yeah. So basically, the old man, he says to the young atheist, in the beginning there was only God, and he was trying to answer this question, and he decided to actually test it to see if he could actually self-destruct. So as he did so, voila, the Big Bang happened. He exploded himself, like a bit like a suicide bomber, and he turned into smithereens of possibilities, and that explains the quantum realm. Like it's a bed of infinite possibilities, and the universe that we see is fragmented, right? So at the end of the story, spoiler alert, by the way, the old man says to the young atheist that, so that's what happens. What we're seeing right now is God answering his own question as time goes on within this universe. And the young atheist goes, oh, is God conscious? And the wise old man says, yes, he is conscious through me and you. And that's how the story ends. And this kind of ties in with what we're talking about, from a non-entropic state, it turns into an ongoing entropic unfolding, as it were.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it kind of puts it poetically when we talk about God and God wants to answer his own question. But I'm not saying it's necessarily like that. I'm not necessarily saying that the story is accurate.
Yeah.
It does speak to the fall that Sophia was talking about. You know, light falls, Lucifer falls. It wants to understand itself. It becomes finite. You know, and it also
it ultimately.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, my model goes a little like out there, and I know it sounds crazy, but in other words, in the Bible, we see this thing where Christ says, "Oh yeah, I will overcome death," right? And death will, won't win in the end. And death obviously is talking about entropy. And so I kind of see consciousness as a self-aware frequency, yes, but it's like its own engineer, right? It's it's engineering itself. And in that way, it's an inner engineering. The same way that you as a person, right? This is how I explained it to my 15-year-old. You as a person, you're born with infinite potential, but you're just a baby. You can't use that yet. You have to discover that through interaction with your environment and inner realizations. And like you said, you go through phases. You go through toddler stage, then teenage, and whatever, until you reach maturity and wisdom. So it's really the same thing I'm saying, but I think this is a theory, y'all. I think that consciousness is trying to figure out how to sustain itself in a way where it technically could last forever within a system.
We are the consciousness that we're talking about. Like, when you look at the transhumanist movement, you look at all these different you look at religion. Religion is like a wishful thinking way to live forever. Like, there's all this, because we're kind of born in this world knowing we're gonna die, and then we're the kind of animal that we have this instinct to survive. At any cost, every cell in our body is fighting to live at all times. But at the same time,
where does that come from?
Right. Well, it comes from the will. It comes from the will of the universe. The will.
That's the unanswered question that Richard Oxenberg, because I spoke to him and he said to me, for all that Darwinian evolution explains, it can't explain the will to survive. That's there from the start. You feel the need to preserve.
That's where I say we're just a mirror of what consciousness is. Consciousness it's not created. It's can't be destroyed, just like energy. And with that being said, we intuitively know that,
And there's a law in nature called the law of information preservation. Information wants to, preserve itself, and maybe that has something to do with that will. That's a law. That's something embedded. Does anybody have any thoughts on this stuff?
I was going to say that for me, that's why I'm skeptical of any sort of afterlife, and maybe that's what I don't know if I'll ever be able to overcome that skepticism of where it's like, is this just the human ego, trying to comfort itself?
Of course it is. Of course.
And I asked that question to myself. I was like, well, what if I only came up with this elephant model because I myself fear death, right? But then the question is, why do we fear death? And yeah, we can say, well, because of the ego and because we identify with the ego, and we don't really, we identify with it so much that we think that's what we are we forget, right? But what if there's a more...
Are you guys familiar with the non-dualist creation story? Have you ever heard of that, Caleb?
I have not.
There's a creation story in non-dualism, idealism, non-dualism. It's just a creation story. It's not like it's a story. It's not like a claim like Genesis or anything.
Gotcha.
But it's kind of like an analogy. But basically, it goes like this: you've got these figurative people, Mary and Jane. So Mary and Jane, um, Jane is imaginary and Mary's the real person. And Mary's sitting around thinking, wow, I would really like to know what it's like to experience this made up place, imaginary place we're going to call Paris. I want to walk around the streets. I want to see the buildings. I want to smell the roses. I want to feel the air against my skin. I want to meet the people. I want to have all these experiences in Paris. But of course, Paris is just a potential place. It's in the imagination. So what does Mary do? She goes to bed and she dreams of Paris, and she becomes this person named Jane. And Jane is walking around Paris and meeting people and constrained by gravity, and gets hungry in Paris and eats in Paris and has all these human experiences in Paris. And she's like, wow, this is really awesome. And then she wakes up, and when she wakes up, she's Mary again, in this particular area. And she can only remember Paris as an impression, as just a way of being. And what does she learn? She's kind of learned about herself through that whole situation, And so that's kind of like non-dualism in a way. It's kind of like an analog. It's like there's a place, there's a realm where everything is just a potential. It's just, sort of an imaginary place. And then we are the dreamers living out these sort of these potentialities.
In other words, it's not that there's an afterlife. So, like, you die and then there's an afterlife. It's that you just return to
that potential, right?
The realization that was just a dream, in a way.
Yeah. Mary, you could call Mary like just the field of potential realities, And then at one point she's Mary or Jane in Paris. Another could be Bob in Seattle, whatever the case is.
Different dream avatars, but essentially the same observer.
Constantly,
when we wake
constantly. Up, yeah.
So
we remember our dream avatars, who we were in the dream, and we may even have had false memories. But we wake up, and we're still alive. We don't mourn the death of our dream avatars.
That's right.
But we're still an observer, and we wake up to a reality that we then remember. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, because experience has one job. Yeah. Experience has one job to experience.
To experience, yeah, that's it.
So to put it into more, I guess, scientific terms, it's like when we die, we become part of the wavelength again. Like,
yeah,
is that what I'm understanding?
It's like a return. It's a homecoming.
And then I become part of the wavelength again, and then I can end up as something else.
Yes.
Technically, yeah.
Okay.
If consciousness decides to express itself in that way again, yeah. So in any other way.
So what happens to consciousness though if we go by the whole most, I guess, popular or most endorsed theory that trillions of years from now there's the cold death and like all there's left is subatomic particles zipping about.
I'm gonna say right now that I do not believe in the postulated cold death of the universe due to entropy, because I believe firmly that everything goes in cycles. So even if some theoretical physicists, astrophysicists would say, oh, even black holes aren't eternal. They're always spewing out energy, and sometimes they're spewing out matter or whatever, and so they could evaporate into nothing. Well, it's not that it evaporates into, just think about the term evaporation. If we are talking about a body of water, the body of water evaporates, so it is gone from that spot. What it did is the molecules got heated up and were dispersed into the air. The water's not gone, it's just moved, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not inclined to believe this heat death of the universe thing.
The problem with scientists is that they look at their own models and they make predictions based on those models, and it's a very narrow way of looking at things. And also, we can only take into account the observable universe. We don't know what's out there beyond what we can see. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it should be said that it's only a hypothetical based on how much we know or how much they think they know. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Evaporation is a bit of a dodgy word or a misnomer because it. I don't know. I just feel like there's
Well,
no evaporation.
you could
There's no
talk about it.
cessation.
You can
So
talk
you-
about it
It's only transformation.
as if we can say that, well, if heat death of the universe is true, let's just for the sake of argument say that, yeah, we know 100% that the heat death of the universe will happen. Where does that leave idealism? And so kind of the way I would
There'll be
look at
another
that,
one.
yeah. Well, the way I look at it is like idealism, regardless of form that you take on board, it really just emphasizes the role of consciousness, mind, or ideas in shaping reality. And so heat
Well,
death
so
theory,
Roger Penrose thinks there's a
I would like to. I
cyclical
would like to give a
process.
really. I would like to give a toddler way of how I think of it because I don't have all this like higher education, right? So
Hey,
I kind of
so-
think of it like,
We're in the same boat, Sophia. So
Yeah.
hey, but we're here to learn, so there's nothing to be ashamed of. That's how I look
Right.
at it. So what I compare it to is like me as a person, right? I'm an artist. I create art, and that art doesn't just pop up. That art's already in my mind, right? And I visualize it and I see it, and then I put it on canvas, for example. Now, if I put that canvas out on the porch and I let the elements get to it for long enough, right? At some point, that canvas is going to break all the way down until it so-called disappears, evaporates, whatever you want to call it. But I can just make another one, right? So we're saying as idealists, consciousness is the underlying reality. So even though that canvas seemingly no longer exists, it's still there. You see what I'm saying? In my mind, and I can create another canvas.
the information is
let's
always
say
there. I would
the
say
information
like,
is there. Yeah, go on, go.
I'm sorry.
like the way I would look at it is like, an idealist might argue like that heat death is just a natural part of a larger cyclical process, and that the mind itself could transcend these physical limitations because it's not physical. The mind is, there's no evidence of mind in the physical world ever, by definition, because it's an inner sort of experience. And so it's a whole different category than the physical. So it's transcendent. Go ahead.
So from what I'm getting though from everyone here is that you also are the same mind as me, that the heat death, while it's it could be possibly true, I too would say, it might be true, it might not be true. We really don't know what the future holds for the cosmos.
Right.
But I'm not even saying like, if the heat death or how cold death or however you want to describe it is true, then that means idealism isn't true. That's not. I hope that's not what you're.
Yeah, that's not right. Right.
It's like, because it's like, to me, it's like if idealism is true, but also the heat death is true, then to me that just means, from my understanding so far, that the universal mind that starts off as simple will end as simple. Like
right. Exactly.
That middle complex part will come to an end.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And ending is kind of a relative term. It's only relative to that dimension of existence. But and a very deeper level.
Right. And I see it like I see it as an end of a specific type of expression, right?
Right.
Like I might have been, when I was a teenager, I was an angry asshole. And then when I got older, I stopped expressing myself like that. And so that didn't end me. I'm still around, but I don't express myself the same way.
Hmm. Exactly. And again, like from a higher perspective, everything is just real equally. There's no like it used to be real versus now this is not real yet. No, from a
Yeah.
higher perspective, everything is just real and existent.
Yeah,
And
and I'm glad you're clarifying that, because that was my concern with our earlier discussion of where it's like, you know, where materialists will say the only thing that's real is this subatomic particle, and it's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
But
it's
then
like,
what is a subatomic
yeah,
particle really?
and to me, it's like, you know, if we're talking about what's just fundamentally real, then yeah, it makes sense to say that this other thing isn't real. But it's like that's not how the cosmos operates. It's like there's all these different levels, and on
Hmm.
each level, you know, it's like, you know, gravity is real, space time is real. It's like to say that it is all an illusion, and the only thing that matters is, you know, the quantum. Like, I feel like that misses the mark.
That misses the mark because like let's
Doesn't
take
that go back?
take a
Doesn't that go?
let me
I'll
use this
just. I just
analogy.
want to.
Oh, go ahead,
I
Sophia.
just
Then
want. I just wanted to ask something. Doesn't that go back to like that conversation that confuses the hell out of me? Causation, where you're saying
correlation
like correlation and causation thing that
are
Yeah,
different.
they're
where
not the same. Yeah.
yeah, because
Correlation doesn't imply causation, basically.
right,
And to say
that's
so is to commit a fallacy. Yeah, it's the cum hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy.
Yeah.
Because you can
and
get
that's what
two
I keep.
two things in sync. Yeah, yeah. Go for it.
That's what I keep. That's what I keep running into, and I try to explain in my limited way of expressing. I try to explain. It's not that I'm saying that manifestation isn't real, right? What's manifest, what we see, is real, but
Hmm.
it's not what causes it. It's just an expression. In
You
other
know what,
words,
Sophia? Yeah, so you know what? I really liked the example you gave of the artwork. So you're an artist, you create a painting. So let's say you're divinely inspired, right? So let's say Neoplatonism is true. You derive all your information from this divine realm closer to the one, and the one is the source. And you're the soul, and you've come down, you've fallen into this world, and basically
but
as the soul, as a restricted perspective, you're divinely inspired, and when you get that information you try to replicate it, and you create this imperfect copy of the
right,
perfect form, the platonic form. So voila, you create an artwork, you create your painting, and the painting is only a symbol that represents that divine inspiration, and that symbol over time will decay, it will disappear. So you feel the need to create
exactly,
another one, and you're trying to express all the information, all that divine information that you're receiving, the pleroma, the totality, that divine, that grace. You feel, oh my God, you're in awe of it, and you feel the need as an artist to create
ex,
copies of it.
ex,
But the copies will always be imperfect, and hence why the artist is always trying to make amendments, make changes. The artist is seldom happy with the artwork, and
because
eventually it will get to a point where the artist will think, okay, I think I've done enough, I don't know how else I can alter it. I've got this ideal in my head, uh, but there is the copy, and it's not quite the same, but maybe I'll get that message, that feeling, that experience within me across to other finite minds out there. I mean, does that make sense? I really enjoyed listening to you talk
absolutely.
about that. Yeah.
That's what I like, how you able to translate my gibberish. That's exactly that's exactly that's exactly what I'm saying. And it's like I always say to Scott, it always feels like it's not happening to me, it's happening through me.
Yeah.
Like a channeling, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that
That's
describes it
how I feel.
perfectly.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
can see it like
Yes.
when I get away, like I'm a songwriter too. So I'll write a song and I'll be working my ass off trying to figure out like what kind of music can I put together? Like, how does the bass line should go to this beat? How should this melody flow around this bass line? Like, and I get caught and I get this writer's block, you know, because of struggling and focusing too much. So what I'll do is I'll go for a walk and put my mind totally off music and start maybe talking on the phone or walking around looking at nature and thinking about other things. Then all of a sudden, boom, the aha moment just occurs to me. I didn't even think about it. I wasn't even trying to will it, but something in my unconscious just sort of gave it to me like a gift, like, here you go.
Yeah.
This is what you need. Now get out of the way and accept it. And I'll take it and I'll be like, yes, this melody goes perfect with this bass line. This is the way I'm going to recreate it. Boom. And then that's how I do it, because it's almost like when you try too hard to control things, you're actually in your own way. But if you
Yeah.
let nature just flow through you, and when I say nature, that you're part of nature, your unconscious mind, subconscious, whatever you want to call it, that is nature's intuition sending signals to you, sending messages to you. Maybe not in words, but in feelings and inspiration. And yeah, it's an amazing thing to see how nature can actually work its magic through you rather than to you. And
Yeah.
that's like what I was just saying, that gives you a glimpse into the nature of reality, what it's really like. You know, it's
You
a
just
thing
gotta
that
ride the wave, man.
ride the wave. You're just part of it. You don't have to worry about whether you're controlling the world. Just enjoy it. Enjoy what comes through you, the experiences, things that happen, and just flow with that shit, man.
I really enjoy Federico Fagin's work, especially the Dariano Fagin theory of consciousness, because he comes up with this CIP framework where
Yep.
C stands for consciousness, and it creates like this semantic space. And then you get from that semantic space, you get the informational space. It's the world of symbols, and the
Mm,
symbols are supposed to mean something. The symbol emerges, and it means something to consciousness. And
yes.
from that informational space, you can derive the virtual space of physicality. So everything that we observe, it's just symbols, it's partial representations of something more holistic. And a symbol doesn't give you the full story. In fact, two finite observers can derive two different meanings from one symbol. The symbol is just a form, it can have multiple applications,
Mm-hmm.
and it's reduced. And this is the reason why whenever people have mystical experiences, they struggle to convey, to get across to other people what they've gone through, because all they can do is try to describe it using words,
Yeah.
and a lot gets lost in translation.
It's
And
So yeah,
that's
inevitable.
why
I
I used to
really,
hate. That's why I used to hate it. Like I would have these experiences, and I'm like, how in the hell am I supposed to explain this shit? And then when I found
yeah,
out about metaphysics and idealism,
yeah.
it made me happy, because at least it comes much closer to how I can now explain this.
And for
In a
those
way.
people who think this is woo, it's not, because Federico
No.
Fagin happens to be the inventor of the first microprocessor, and
Yep.
Giacomo Doriano is actually the father of quantum metrology, and is been awarded so many times. Is both men are geniuses, so
Yep.
and both men are now saying that idealism. I know Federico Fagin describes himself as a panpsychist, but it's not really constitutive panpsych. It's practically idealism. But both men
Yep.
are practically saying that materialism isn't tenable. It has to. It
No.
has to start from mind, and that's where Sophia's model comes in.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I did a video on biosemiotics and stuff and incorporated all that stuff. And this is where it actually comes from. And, and it was saying, like there's a lot of people that say this is where like this whole idea of special revelation, and if you use religious language, they'll call it like revelation, like some sort of God speaking to you or revealing something to you. It's sort of like an analog to what's really going on, where actually in nature, all creatures are given representations, symbols to understand nature and to carry on the will to live and to survive and keep moving. And anyways, I wanted to play a little bit of this one video. I think you guys will love this.
Mhm.
About kind of goes right along what we were talking about. Let's see. Yeah, like this just shows you. Here we go.
With a very specific tree in a forest that I very often visit, I always found the tree beautiful,
Hopefully we'll.
but it was on sort of a walk in nature with a small amount of psychedelic substances
Scott,
that are, I mean, we live.
Is it cutting
I
off
don't
too
know
much?
if you see it. I don't know if you're seeing it. Yeah, it's doing that, and also you got everybody on top of the video.
Okay, never mind. Anyways, yeah, it was. If you get a chance, you guys can look at it. It's called Biosemiotics: A New Way to Understand Non-Human Consciousness. But it just talks about in
Can
nature
you
how.
spell it out in the comment section, please?
Yeah, certainly will. Let me actually copy and paste it.
Biosemiotics.
Yep, I'll put it right here in the public live chat.
Awesome.
I think someone covered it on the Essential Foundation channel, and
Yep.
I think Michael Levin has something to say as well about that.
Oh yeah, there's so much information on that, and it's really, really fascinating. But it really supports non-dualism, like how everything is really connected intimately in nature,
Yeah.
and also just how consciousness sort of resonates with nature in a feedback loop between things, like even trees, between trees and lakes and bushes and even animals. They can feel like, so some sort of intuition that, say, a great earthquake is coming or a tsunami, and then they're able to leave like hours beforehand. Like, how did they get that information? It's through vibration, like kind of a frequency. Yeah, they run for the hills. Yeah, and they get this
even before our instruments can detect that's something's afoot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really
and
amazing.
that's how it works for some humans, and I don't see it as a revelation from God or that you're a prophet. I just see it kind of like I have wrote this little piece about the experience with my mom and stuff, and I think that we experience certain things that crack us open, and then we become more aligned with certain frequencies. So now you're like a receiver of that frequency, and it's like receiving a signal more so,
Yeah, like binaural beats. We were looking at a little video before we came on, like how these different frequencies, they can artificially create like certain frequencies in one ear and another frequency in another ear, and it creates like this brand new frequency that you become aware of at the same time, and then that puts you in a totally different conscious state. It can either relax you, help you be more creative, give you an out of body experience. There's different frequencies that do different things. They do different things to affect your conscious experience in life. And so that just is further, evidence that the brain works with frequencies, delta waves, alpha waves, all of these things are just different frequencies. And that's how they're
and the brain
expressed.
itself. Yeah, and the brain itself is only a symbol in perception.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, which represents what mind is doing. A human mind is what a human brain looks like.
And in a way, we're measuring consciousness. We're just not, we're measuring it in bits and pieces every time we're measuring brainwaves, but indirectly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. What you have any questions, Caleb, about anything?
Well, something that was coming to mind, which I've yet to finish this whole discussion, but I was watching, I think it was Dr. Penrose. It had Castrop and Frederico.
Fragine, yeah.
Fragine, like they were discussing how consciousness can't be computated. And,
Right.
And I know that at least Dr. Penrose isn't an idealist, but he has come to the conclusion that it's not computational. And so
Yep.
I know idealists also accept this, and so it's like, to me, it's the one thing that materialists have an issue with that I find interesting is the whole concept of AI or machines having a consciousness, like that whole philosophical debate of like, oh, will we eventually have to give machines rights? And it's like, to me, that problem just disappears under idealism, because it's like, well, they can never truly have consciousness because of what they are.
Now, yeah, and that's kind of debated.
Right.
It's like someone like Penrose. He's the close cousin of an idealist. He calls himself a Platonist, a mathematical Platonist.
Yeah.
Go figure. He's a mathematician. So so he's
Same as
probably
Max
going to lean.
Tegmark.
Yeah, Max Tegmark's the same way. They both are like into that. But the only problem that I have in understanding that is mathematics is more of a description rather than a prescriptive force. Like, it's just the language we use to describe the universe. So I'm not sure what kind of causal power could a mathematical description actually have. Now, I know Max Tegmark goes in and talks about geometrical structures. Like, he talks about, it's not, you've got math, which is just the numbers we use to describe the universe, but then you've got mathematical objects. And that's mainly what he's talking about. He's saying the mathematical objects, but he never really describes how that works. Like, is the mathematical object conscious? And he says, well, in a way, yeah, because on another perspective, you are that mathematical construct, and you're experiencing what it's like to be that mathematical construct. Actually, everything in the universe is a mathematical, but it's like, well, who's constructing it though? If you say it's a construct,
Yeah.
who's the one constructing? And he's like, well, we don't need to worry about that part. But it's like, but that's the part I think that everybody's worried about. Like,
That's what we want to know.
That's what we're all arguing about. Like, And he was like saying,
We're all
at one
searching
point,
for God.
yeah, he was like, well, you can say God, or you can even say idealism, but I would rather just go only as far as the math, because at least the math gives us the description that can account for the object, but the object is not the subatomic particles, because the subatomic particles are abstractions, and they're mathematical. So that's as far as we're going to go with it. But it's like,
I was going to say about AI, it seems to me like we as human beings are trying to figure out what objects represent, right? If say we're trying to figure out if computers that run programs, if they're conscious, and we should make a distinction between simulated minds and actual minds. And I think when it comes to computers, we really have to be careful, because transistors are very different from organisms, from cells and tissues, and all the integration that goes on in a living organism. And I always remember John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment, which I think he describes it in a paper in the 80s called Minds, Brains, or Brains, Minds, and and machines, and basically he gets you to imagine someone in a room, and he has a manual on how to manipulate Chinese symbols. So basically, you don't have to know Chinese. All you need to know is how to respond to certain symbols that come through the door. So if someone passes into the door a Chinese message, you don't have to understand it. All you have to do is look at the manual and see what symbols you can respond with according to the manual, so that to the person outside the room, it looks like you understand Chinese when you actually don't. So basically, all you need is syntactic knowledge, not semantic knowledge. So basically, you don't have to understand it. All you have to do is match the symbols. And John Searle says, just like you could do that with a human being, and the human being would pass the Turing test to a Chinese person outside the room, you can also do that with a machine. So the machine would just be a language model, and it would run a program on how to match the symbols to make appropriate responses to the
Mm,
questions that come through the room. And the machine wouldn't have to know anything. The machine wouldn't have to think. The machine doesn't need a mind. All it has to do is to run the program based on syntax, based on how to construct sentences, and how those sentences can match the
yeah,
sentences that are passed into the room. So the machine doesn't have to understand anything. It has no semantic knowledge. It
knowledge at
doesn't have a
all. And
mind.
this is what
Yeah.
Penrose was going back about. Consciousness is not computable. You
Yeah.
can't like copy a conscious stream of consciousness. You can't like copy and paste it somewhere, and duplicate it, clone it like you can like a phrase or a mathematical equation. Like there's understanding, like the math doesn't have the understanding of itself. That takes an
Yeah.
observer to understand it. But this is what Neil deGrasse Tyson, I saw an interview he had with David Chalmers, and he was making the complaint. He was like, he goes, the thing about you computer guys and consciousness guys that I don't understand, he says, is you guys started off saying, oh, well, there's this thing called a Turing test. And once you're able to pass the Turing test, then we're going to be able to measure the consciousness and go from there. He says, well, we've
Yeah.
already done that.
That's
And
false.
it's like every time you
Yeah.
do it, it's like you're always moving the goalpost. And he goes, and it
This
starts
is
to
what
make,
John Searle.
yeah. And he was saying, it makes him wonder, do we have like this human bias? Like we have this, we're like machine bigots. Like we can't really
Yeah.
accept that something other than humans can have something we have. Like we're trying to hoard it all for ourselves. Like we're the only thing that can be conscious. And I know I said Turing test, but we're gonna shift the goalpost again because it just can't be true. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, like, this is exactly what um, John Searle was saying. No matter how intelligent or how human-like a machine appears to be, that's not sufficient. The Turing test won't be able to determine
Mm-mm.
whether something has a mind or not. It's just not possible. It could just be a semblance, a simulation of
Yeah.
an intelligent, conscious being.
I like
You
what
know.
Bernardo Kastrup says. He's like, you know, I can make a simulation. He goes, in fact, I have an entire simulation of how the bladder works on my computer, but it has never peed on my desk ever.
Exactly. I love that too.
Yeah.
Like there's a
Exactly.
difference. There's something different. Something's missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
For one,
And
it doesn't have the sense of I am. It doesn't have that.
No.
Now some people could argue and say, well, if you took that program, that simulation program, and you actually put it in a robot that
In a
had that
3D
matched,
meat printer.
and printed it
But
out,
but
maybe it
that
would
that would
pee.
be the point of manifestation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say that it's the whole like idea of being able to upload your mind onto a computer is just that science fiction? Then
I think
you'd
it's
never be
science
able to.
fiction. I can't see it. Now, I'm not saying that I'm totally right on that, but I
I,
disagree because I think that we consciousness comes from embodiment, from being something,
Mhm.
you know. Like
yeah, I
if
think it's fiction too, because um, it presupposes functionalism and computationalism. It assumes those things are true, that minds are just information processing, and that all you need is a simulation in order for mind to suddenly become true, to appear. Poof, magic.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
just there.
let me
The
let me
simulation
ask
is
that.
sufficient.
Let me ask you something though. Would it theoretically be possible though to create an interface that could ultimately at some point receive, uh express, or I guess hold consciousness maybe? Like
That's what I was thinking. Like
Maybe.
a lot of panpsychists
I'm
believe that.
like I don't
Actually,
believe it in, I don't believe it like how materialists think that consciousness is generated by the brain, so if there's enough complexity we can just generate consciousness. I kind of see it in the other way around, kind of like would something, would it be inhabitable, like
yeah,
by
that's what I'm saying.
by consciousness?
I think as long as a system has enough gateways, like if you're using computer terms, like I'm a computer guy, so I'll use like gateways, right? Like you have these circuits, and you have gateways where they go into other circuits, and they kind of like distribute energy, and that energy turns into information when it goes through particular gateways, right? Like they produce symbols, and the symbols are decoded on the other end by another device, and it uses that as a gateway to then promote that information on. And so it could be that it's kind of like what I don't know if you guys are
But
familiar with
would that
Thomas.
be, but would that then be more like a natural
Well, it's like
evolution?
Thomas. Well, it's like Thomas Campbell said. Like there's this there's this field of consciousness, and whenever there's a device or a brain or an animal or some kind of system that's able to make more than one choice, then consciousness will grab it and impose itself, and then the thing will be conscious because it becomes one with that thing. As long as the system is able to process information and make decisions, then it will have like this feeling of free will, this feeling of beingness, right? So like IIT
I
goes
like
under
that.
that premise. Like integrated information theory is based on that premise.
Yeah.
Like it just says consciousness is a given. Like we don't know what it is. It's just this thing. And if we just create this system with enough logic gates involved, then all of a sudden it starts lightening up. It'll light up. It'll start
But that
doing
would
shit.
still be, that would still be consciousness as a fundamental reality,
Right.
and
Right.
we would still be, the ones to
Mhm.
express that or come up with that. So we could technically create an AI bot or whatever that could eventually inhabit consciousness. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's so weird.
It would be the dreamer as opposed to the dreamed, as opposed
Right.
to just the dreamed.
Yeah.
It would represent a conscious unit. It would be, yeah, consciousness, as you said, Scott. It would grab it, and I think what was I going to say? I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, consciousness would grab it, and it would need to also have degrees of freedom. Like it would have to be able to change over time
Yep.
and shed its skin. Like a brain replaces its own cells and it changes all the time, as opposed to fixed transistors. So conscious AI may come with the evolution of AI itself into something else that includes not just assemblage, but also replication, also growth.
Maybe
As
one way to do
living
it,
things do.
Right.
maybe one way to do it is to combine it with human cells, like
Well,
human or animal brain cells or something.
the thing I was going to
That's
bring
what
up
I was
Yeah.
thinking. Oh my
is-
God.
is so
Get out of my head, Scott.
so uploading someone's consciousness seems really out there, but if we take it down a notch and try to look at something that is actually happening in the real world, it's like people, so scientists have come up with synthetic neurons, and you can put these synthetic neurons into a human brain, and it'll
Yep.
act just like a normal neuron. So it's like, so if you were to replace all the neurons in your brain
One by
with
one, yep.
yeah, and so it's like, would that produce a mind? And
Yeah,
so,
that's the question. That's the ultimate question. And I think that the fact that it's still connected to your body, like it's connected to your heart rate, your liver, your genes,
Damn it.
your hormone state, the same meat, basically it's going to be entangled with that. And so there would be no change. You wouldn't know the difference. I don't think you would really know the difference. But if you were to try to put your consciousness into like a dog, that's not going to work. You're just going to be a dog. It's like,
yeah, that's why to me the whole mind swapping in fiction never made sense to me. It's like,
yeah, it doesn't make sense.
If we were to swap brains, I would never have known that we would swap brains. I would think I'm just you. And
Right. Exactly.
Right.
That's why twins, like twins, we even have examples in nature. Babies are born twins, but they have their own experiences. They have their own unique, private, subjective experiences. Even though they share the same genes and the same things, they just diverge. And
They
once
just
they
happen
diverge,
to look very much alike.
right.
And sometimes they speak at the same time, which is really weird. Have you seen the twins that appeared on the Jimmy Kimmel show?
Kimmel
Is it
show,
Jimmy
nuh-uh.
Kimmel? Yeah, these two girls, two twins, they would speak at the same time as if they were sharing one mind, as if something there, I'm not going to say it went wrong, but something isn't quite as normal as it should be. It's almost like one mind split into two bodies because they talk at the same time. It's almost like they're sharing one mind. And it says something, it seems to say something towards Kastrup's model of the mind at large and us being all one mind, and we get split. And people even joked, maybe people who subscribe to analytic idealism even joked maybe the dissociation didn't quite fully happen with those two. Instead of they could have been born as one person, but instead they
That's
came
a
as
lot.
two twins. And
Yeah.
and it's almost like they share the same thought stream. It's really weird, really
Yeah,
strange.
it's got to be entanglement on some level, surely, isn't it? That makes sense, because if they were all subatomic particles, atoms, and they were combined at one point, as a fetus growing, and then all of a sudden they split off. There's an entanglement there. So yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I can even see, you heard of these stories where people take organs from people who died in a car accident or something, and they had their organs donated, and people start taking in their organs that need it, and then they start having these memories that they're not familiar with, like
The other
then they
person,
come to find
I've
out
heard of
the
that.
other person had
I've only seen that in movies, and I didn't know if that was real. Is that actually real?
I mean, the stories are real. There's real stories about it. I've heard that. But that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. It could just be exaggeration or whatever, but if it did, I would just, if that were true, I would just probably say it's because they got entangled with some of their cells. And I think memories are housed not only somewhere unknown, but also throughout the body. It's not just, you know, in the brain in some specific region. I think memories are, you know, encoded everywhere.
Lots of paper towels. Lots.
But here comes
Protein
Armando.
ions, right? If
Yeah, I
you
used to. Yeah.
you must have heard of some NDEers who report feeling like they're spread out, they're localized from the ceiling, observing everything that's being done to their bodies, but at the same time, they're spread out and they report feeling like they're the walls, the table, the beds,
Yeah.
and beyond. It's almost like they feel like it's one body, like the rest of the universe is one body. They feel
Yeah.
like they're literally the walls and the objects, which seems to support idealism, really.
Yes.
Like all the
Non-dualism.
Yeah.
representations, all the symbols, it's just consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely had experiences like that on DMT
Me too.
and even LSD, to be honest.
Yeah, man.
You druggie.
I'm not. Look, I'm not a druggie. I don't do drugs.
Psychonaut.
I don't consider psychedelics to be drugs, and it's not like I've done it that many damn times, but I've done it a few times.
Yeah.
Making me
I
jealous.
can talk as well.
And I have that other stuff. I call it the Jesus juice. I have it. I have it, and I don't touch it for like months and months and months because it's not something that you do all the time. I kind of call it cleaning out my closet when I do it. Once a year, I gotta tune my frequencies. like a guitar, you gotta tune your strings a couple times.
Yeah.
I've
That's
never
right.
had an experience, so
Keep the harmony. Yeah.
Kayla,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
should try it. One day we're gonna have a big event, and we're all gonna meet, and we're all gonna try to experience some the DMT and things of that nature, man.
Yeah, man, we gotta do it. We gotta do it, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am told that not to do it alone. So
Yeah, don't do it alone. It might freak
You
out.
can do it alone. I don't know why people say that because whatever happens, happens, and you're gonna be fine.
Some people want to sound important.
It's not like you're gonna still be aware of the people around you any damn way. So
Exactly.
you're gonna
Vegas
blast
trip.
off.
Yeah, let's meet in Vegas, man. That'll be
Hey,
good.
Vegas, yeah.
Hell yeah. What goes on in Vegas, baby?
Yeah. Stays in Vegas.
Yes, man. I lived there for a while.
By the way, did you guys watch that Jordan Peterson versus 25 Atheists? I think
Yes.
Yes. Oh
That
my
was something.
God.
I've heard about it. I
I
haven't
didn't
seen
watch
it.
it, but I heard that the title of the video was originally one Christian versus 20 or 25 atheists.
Right.
But then
Jubilee dropped
they
the ball.
changed it. They changed the title to Jordan Peterson versus the atheist because it's like, you know, in
Because
some
he's a
ways
flag waving phony.
he refuses to give clear answers as to whether or not he's an actual Christian.
Yeah.
I think he needs to stick to psychology because the two don't really mix. But okay.
Yeah, he it's almost like he argues for the vague God, like the sort of like the deistic God, that real vague nebulous God thing.
No, don't
I
insult
actually-
don't insult deists like that, Scott.
Yeah.
I was going to say most of the debate he was arguing for God as being a conscience that can tell right from wrong, and
Yeah, the philosophical
went into
God,
and he was at one point debating with the young atheists about where morality comes from. You know, where do you derive an ought from an is? That kind of debate was covered. And I sometimes thought that the atheists themselves were misinterpreting what he was saying or assuming that he was saying something when he wasn't. So I think that was wrong on both sides. But yeah, he wanted to make clear that maybe he was strawmanning the atheists as well by saying that the atheists are attacking a very simplified version of God, like this
Of
man
course,
in
of
the
course.
sky.
See,
Yeah, but then the atheists, yeah, go for it.
But that
that's
is the exact narrative that is laid out by Christianity, is a very specific
right.
anthropomorphic God. So I
Yeah.
do feel like it's fair for, you know, atheists or agnostics or whatever kind of belief
And
non-Christian people to attack that, because
and
it doesn't hold under scrutiny.
and it's like Jordan Peterson reduces atheists down to basically psychopaths. It's like they're devoid of morals.
Right.
That's what a true atheist is. I'm just
And
like,
yeah,
okay.
exactly. And he'll say you're not an atheist because you're not out there killing everybody. So that's the proof right there.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
If you're
just
if
like
you're
a
a nihilist, yeah, if you're a psychopath and a nihilist, then you will suffer and you're in need of salvation. That's basically the argument he made during that exchange. But yeah, his version of, well, he doesn't really consider himself well, he hasn't said he's a Christian, right? He's very
not
careful.
explicitly. He's
He
very
says, I don't
vague
have,
and dodgy about it.
yeah,
Mhm.
at one point he said, I'm not at liberty to say, or
It's not
I'm
your
not,
business.
yeah, not your business. I don't have to say it in public. But he did say that he has a specific interpretation of the Bible, which is more metaphorical and takes into account Jungian archetypes, and he goes over the story of Job, and it's not to be taken literally. And
Mhm.
there's a wager between the devil and God, and you shouldn't take that literally. It's basically a psychological process within someone's mind, and it gets you to imagine that when you realize, when Job is confronted by God, when Job keeps saying why, and God says to him, well, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Which sounds a bit harsh, really.
Mhm.
But if you take that to mean that it's a mental process in someone's mind, this is basically Peterson's argument.
Interpret it. Yeah.
If you take that to be a self-realization, you realize that the universe was there before you were born, and it happened before you even came about, and it laid its foundations, and also that you are the world itself experiencing itself through the eyes of a human being. So it's a bit like that, basically. And it takes
Yeah.
into account that the rest of the universe is the collective unconscious, which is basically the mind at large, as
Right. And I
defined by
mean,
Pascal.
that's the thing, is that what Jordan Peterson tends to do is he tries to create this tricky, hard to pin down argument against Christianity. So for some reason he wants to hold the label. He wants to keep the label Christian. And I think that's because it appeals to more of his audience. He's got to
Yeah.
keep an audience, of Christians,
Yeah.
unbelievers. He's trying to get as many people as he can. So
Yeah.
his job, how can I be a Christian without saying I'm a Christian? You know what I mean? And it's
which just makes people want to label him as a grifter.
as a grifter, right? And see, even the Christians, I was watching all these the main Christian channels this week to get the reaction, and all the Christians were so upset and disappointed, and they were like, yeah, he's like not really representing Christianity the way Jesus would have represented it. He's not even able to own up to the fact that he's a Christian. It's almost like he's ashamed to say it. And then he tries to get out of those really tricky, hard questions by, coming at them with something they're not prepared for. Like, these atheists are probably used to dealing with your typical evangelical Christian type, right?
Yeah.
So they wanted Jordan Peterson to fit that bill because they were all prepared beforehand to challenge that kind of Christian. But when Jordan Peterson says, I'm not really going to tell you whether I'm a Christian or not, it's none of your business, then it makes it hard to really get down to the point, and
Although he did say that Christians themselves can differ in what they believe in because of people having different concepts of God or what they mean by God, and he
Yeah.
made the distinction between what you say you believe in and what you actually do, which reflects
Yeah.
your true belief.
Mhm.
So he did have a nuanced
Yep.
outlook,
Yeah. It was the old
which I think some of the atheists
intellectual beliefs.
weren't prepared for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was trying to say intellectual belief versus embodied beliefs.
Yeah. And
yeah,
it's
that's
not
right.
it's not like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, and the problem with some of those atheists is that they are very dogmatic themselves. So
Yeah, I did get that feeling.
Yeah.
I thought, well,
Go ahead, Caleb.
he's going against 25 atheists. He's
Yeah.
definitely going to lose because atheists tend to be quite quite intelligent, quite
Yeah, they
quite,
are.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
they are.
Caleb.
it's not the best discussion format anyways, but it's like for me Jordan Peterson, it's not like he's all word salad. It's like he makes good points, certain good points, but it's like my issue with him, besides what I've just stated, is like, to a non-philosopher he sounds smart. Like he's using analytic philosophy of, like, what do you mean by this, what do you mean by that, that's a valid form of philosophy. And to me, though, it just seems like he's butchering it so that he can just obfuscate what he truly believes in.
Right. Yeah.
Well, he
I
said
do.
atheists don't know what they're rejecting. And then he goes on to define God. One of his definitions, because he does say that God can be defined in many ways, according to the Bible, according to his interpretation, his hermeneutical interpretation. So he says that God can also be defined as conscience, where you're able to tell right from wrong. And then he confronts the atheists by saying, where do you derive your hierarchy of values? How can you tell right from wrong? What do you use? What's the benchmark that you use to be able to tell right from wrong? And and atheists usually resort to evolution, and that's where how morality comes about. Through evolution, through experience, and then beings just. But the thing is, you do have instances of animals who are
Show
not
morality.
as have their own morality. They seem to care about other animals. So it does call into it's very deep. When it comes to morality, it's very deep.
What's it calling into question?
Oh, is that a question?
Well, you said it calls into question. So I was wondering what you were getting at.
Oh, me. Sorry.
Mhm.
Is it to me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I mean, from just like when it comes to morality, at least, it's like, all right. So there's the question of how did morality come about, and to me, it's like evolution obviously explains that. It's like
that's exactly what the atheists were saying.
Yeah, but then there's like, all right, so well, how do you derive, hierarchy? How do you find what's important?
How do you derive a naught from an is?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, though, as someone who believes, or morality came about through evolution, it's like morality itself, even though it's subjective. It's coming from within us, so it's like you can't really derive truths, true or false statements from morality. All you can really do is see whose morality agrees with your morality, and if you get enough overlap, then you can form a society through that overlap. Enough people agree that murder is wrong, so it's like, okay, well, we can all agree then murder is wrong. It's like,
I'll be right back.
Yeah, but then he would say specifically you as an individual, what makes you think that something like murder is wrong? Because from a serial killer's perspective, murder is okay.
And my answer to that is simply it's because it's subjective. It's subjective, and the only way we get we can get an objective statement like, oh, murder is wrong, is that once we have a moral framework like humanism, where it's like, all right, well, you know, we want human flourishing, so there are certain things that can make humanity flourish, and there's certain things that can make humanity not flourish. What are the things that make humanity not flourish? Well, if everyone's just murdering each other, well, that, you know, that's going to just bring about the, you know, probably the extinction.
It's self-destructive.
Yeah, you know, it's like, to
It's
me,
self-destructive.
yeah. So it's like, to me, it's not an issue that, oh, morality isn't objective. It's just, you know, it's a messy process, and to me, you know, the way human history paints that picture, it's like we at one point embraced slavery as a moral norm, and then over thousands of years we were like, oh wow, that's fucked up. We probably shouldn't do that anymore, you know.
I think some people realized that before it was actually officially established.
That's where idealism comes in, that there has to be a deeper truth, right? And where that all comes from.
It comes from feeling. Yeah, it comes from feeling, from will, from consciousness. And it just can't explain. It can't be explained through evolution. It's just a process, and then it's a feeling. Yeah, you were going to say, Sophia.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. You know, I think there's levels to it. Yeah, of course, you could be a Muslim because you were raised in a Muslim country. But I'm saying, like, basic things that we naturally are tuned into, where does that come from?
Yeah.
That's things we already just know.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, you've just reminded me of it, Sophia. When it comes to morality, I don't believe in moral relativism. You know, when people say, oh, who are we to say that other cultures are wrong for blinding kids or for throwing gays off of rooftops? You know, who are we to say that because it's their culture? I think we can say something about that. We can say it brings about suffering. We can say it's unfair. It's despicable. So I think it's not relative at all. I think it's something that we should all aspire to for the betterment of all mankind.
Yeah, which I feel like there's a common misconception that if you believe in subjective morality, then you must believe that morality is relative. And it's like, I don't believe that. It's like I have standards, and it's like I try to live by those standards, and if I can make an argument of, oh hey guys, maybe we should all live by these standards because, you know, it helps everyone out, then we should live by those standards.
Yeah, I think we're entitled to say that some cultures are definitely better than others when it comes to morality. And, you know, I do think there is some kind of universality to be discovered there. I mean, I don't think it's entirely subjective. And when I say subjective, I mean just an individual. I don't think a complete perfect morality can be derived from one individual alone, because there's so many scenarios that the human mind possibly can't imagine in the course of one lifetime. You know, I mean, we could all imagine the trolley problem. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So say you're driving a train and the track splits into two, and on one side you have a group of people, and on the other side you have one person. Where do you go? Do you go right to kill the group of people, or do you go left to kill just one person? Most people would say you would go left and only kill one person because you're sparing several lives. But if you change that to, on one side you have a group of strangers, on the right side, say you have a group of strangers, and on the left side you have a loved one,
your mom,
a family member, your mom, for example, or your wife. That changes immediately. You're going to think, well, I love my wife, I love my mom. I'm going to have to kill the strangers because you know,
I don't care about my wife.
You ain't got a wife.
She can go.
Well, yeah, I'd say human connection definitely muddies the waters there, and I'm pretty familiar with the whole trolley problem. I know I've been watching Alex's O'Connor's. He'll sometimes have videos just dedicated to the trolley problem.
But you
Yeah,
see,
Alex
all
O'Connor's
rationality
wrong.
goes out the window, and you appeal to emotion. You love
Well,
your mum, you love your wife or whatever, and immediately you would rather kill the strangers, even if they're more numerous, than one single loved one. So that's your own morality right there,
I'd be happy to
and
do
and
it.
it disagrees with consequential, not
Shut the
consequentialism.
hell up,
What's
Scott.
the other one?
utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism, right
Yeah.
there. I mean, we can rationally come up with a philosophical system whereby we try to derive the best morality possible, something like utilitarianism. But the moment your loved ones are involved in a problem like the trolley problem,
Hmm.
you can't help it but ignore rationality and follow you follow your heart. That's it. You follow your heart.
I think it's a mistake though to try and separate the two. It's like your logic and your emotions are intertwined. It's like,
Hmm.
oh,
It just depends on what logic track you're on. Like, there's a logic to religion. It can be perfect. And
I
no
wouldn't do either.
contradiction.
I would run away.
Who's watched Romulus? Have you guys seen Romulus?
Yeah.
The last of the Alien
Mhm.
series.
I've not
At
seen
one
it yet.
at one point,
Oh wait,
the
yeah,
android
yeah.
No
the
spoilers.
android is making a calculation.
Me and you just did, Alex.
Yeah.
You see that the android, it makes a calculation where he chooses to not open a door to save someone on the outside, because by opening the door it would let the alien in, and the chances were that all the humans in the room, in the sheltered
Mhm.
room, would be killed in all probability. So the android doesn't open the door, even though the humans inside the room are saying, open the door, let him in, let him in. And the android doesn't react and just keeps the door shut. So he's making a calculation based on utilitarianism.
What
But
a
to the human
stupid
being,
android.
that looks quite harsh, quite cold, quite uncaring, even.
Yeah.
I think we just can't help but hope. That's the thing. The android doesn't seem to have hope. It just makes calculations and goes for the most probable outcome, the best outcome, right?
It's kind of
Based on
like
probabilities.
but
the human has
Yeah.
the logic is based on whatever it is you're trying to support. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Hold on, I've got a call. My job's calling. Hold on.
All right. But yeah, I mean, you can't strip the human emotion from morality. That's impossible.
I think we're all still trying to figure out what's the best way to live, to coexist.
Mhm. Yeah, it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. Yeah, definitely.
And so
But
yeah, I get what you're saying with like where the atheists though they'll explain how morality came about, and then they'll just stop there. And it's like, well, there's more to it than that. And as an atheist, it's like, yeah, it's like, I can say, oh well, morality is a synthesis of your cognitive abilities, your biology, and the outside environment. But it's like that doesn't really get me to, well, how should I live my life?
Right.
I don't know if you watched the interaction between Jordan Peterson and the atheists, but one of the atheists did try to explain it in mechanistic terms, and he was pointing to dopamine and what's the other one, serotonin.
Serotonin,
To explain the tension and emotion, and he was basically pointing at the symbols rather than the actual thing. Whereas I felt like Jordan Peterson was coming more from the psyche as a psychologist. And the thing is, funnily enough, Carl Jung himself, even though he never identified himself as an idealist, he was actually an idealist, because he did say at one point, psyche is everything. And I think Jordan Peterson comes from that camp, whereas the atheists, they tended to be more materialistic, and they are coming more from a place of nihilism as well, where you know it's all illusory, like consciousness itself is an illusion. The meaning that we derive, that's also illusory. It's all an illusion, basically. Anything to do with the mind is an illusion.
Yeah. And see, the philosophically and logically, that path leads you to really bad outcomes. But oddly enough, you know, most materialists are pro-trans people. They're pro-well-being. They want to support the good experience of all beings. You know, so they actually do have that sort of thing. So I always say that I think that all people are really epistemic idealists at the end of the day. They just don't know it. They won't admit it. But they're all epistemic idealists. Because if they weren't, then why would you do anything? Why would you even have a need
I
to do
mean,
what you want, you know?
if we want to just revisit the trolley problem just really quickly, because I don't want to, keep going
Hmm.
back to that. There's so many scenarios,
Mhm.
but in the one hypothetical scenario, where I had to choose between like a loved one and some strangers, I might be inclined to choose to save my loved one, because I know them, or at least I know them well enough, and I can evaluate from my experience with them that my loved one is a decent person and therefore worth saving. The strangers, I don't know those strangers. They could be just a whole group of like fucking pedophiles and rapists and slavers
They
and
could
shit.
be,
You know,
but you don't know for sure.
I
And
don't
then
know for sure.
you'd have to live with the consequences that you might have killed 5 innocent people over your
Hmm.
loved one.
Yeah, so I would hypothetically, I would, have to choose between saving my loved one, condemning the strangers because I don't know what they could be. They could be something bad, or refraining from making a choice, because if I don't make the choice, then it's none of it is my fault. Like the whole situation was not my doing, and how could I be expected to make a choice? Oh, you should save the most people. Like mathematically, that might make
Hmm.
sense, but that doesn't make sense from like a human a standpoint. Like you're literally choosing who's going to die, and how am I supposed to live with the consequences of that?
But
Or the other option would be um, uh, push the trolley to the side that will run over my loved one, and hope that I have time to actually free them, because you know you can't free a bunch of people. There's not enough time in the trolley problem, but
you
there
can
might
you can
be
only
enough time to free one person.
yeah, you can only hope. However, that's the thing. We don't really know what would happen in that scenario, and what thoughts we would have, or what memories we would even have in that moment when the trolley is going towards, uh, you know, whoever, and you might start remembering something unpleasant that your loved one
Hmm.
did to you in the past, and then you might be hearing uh, through the radio. Let's say there's a radio in the carriage, and in the radio you might be hearing the loved ones of the strangers saying how good they are, how amazing they've been in their lives. They've donated to charity. They've been great parents and siblings, and they've helped so many people, and they're exemplary in society. You could be
I still
hearing this
couldn't know
amazing
that to be
history.
true. That could be all lies. Like,
True, true. But then again, some some people would say that even your memories aren't trustworthy. And when you have pleasant memories about your loved one, for example, they could all be false memories. Maybe
Yeah.
in the moment when you're about to crash into people, um, you've suffered some kind of aneurysm, or something's gone wrong in the brain, and it gives you a completely warped experience of what's gone on in the past, and then you can't even trust your own judgment. So it's very yeah, it's very uncertain, really.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just throwing out challenges just to get a response. But yeah, you've handled yourself quite well. So well done. Yeah, nobody knows how we would behave in the situation. We can all imagine how we would behave and how we would like to behave in certain situations. But when we're actually faced with them, it might be a completely different story. We might even disappoint ourselves.
Well, I mean, to me, it's like the thought experiment isn't like, oh, we hope we're never in such a scenario, but it's like, it's more just like, is it, it's a critique on our inner moral logic. Like, does it hold up?
Yeah, we're only human at the end of the day. I mean,
Yeah,
when there's
and
no
even
time.
humans that maybe don't have a functioning like emotional processing, and they might act in a really kind of mechanistic sort of way, like psychopaths, or people who are like a sociopaths, like somebody who's like a nihilist that's become like disenchanted with the human experience and relating to other humans, might just make decisions like a machine would, just based on like sheer numbers and probability, rather than like any kind of personal feelings or relationships. Even a person like that could be mistaken, and I've seen this play out in a show that I watched. It was an anime, okay, but there's this guy. He's like that. He becomes like a mercenary, and his goal in life is to basically to fight the what he considers to be the forces of evil, to protect the greatest number of people from like death and damnation or whatever, right? But the way he is so cold and calculating, it ultimately does not hold up to scrutiny, because as he's shown at the end, at the culmination of this show, that whenever he makes this choice to kill the fewer number of people to save the many, then another choice appears, and then he has to again kill the few to save the many, and then the choice comes again, and he has to kill the few to save the many. So over the course of time, he has ended up killing many people, and so it, in the grand scheme of things, hasn't made a difference. He hasn't saved anybody. He's only killed,
Yeah,
and so it's just a
What's
yeah,
what's the name of the show?
uh Fate. That one was Fate Zero.
Okay.
Yeah, and
it
it gets into
reminds
some
me of
pretty. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, it reminds me of a book I read. I think it's called Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit. He was actually this massive, renowned philosopher, and he was into trying to find the best possible morality, and he was going through the different types: utilitarianism, self-serving, or I think it's called self-serving, which is, it's a kind of egoism. And then he was going through consequentialism. He was going through all of them, and he was conjuring up all these scenarios where you would kill some to save the many, and then over time, what happened? When you factor in time, then what applies to, I'm trying to briefly explain the book, but basically you had this notion of what you can do within a short space of time might not be applicable long term, and vice versa. It's it was trying to basically identify all sorts of problems that you can run into, and yeah, that's what your story reminded me of, that show. It's so complex. It's so complex. But even if you make mistakes along the way with your choices on how to minimize suffering, you're only human, and it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. I mean, at the end of the day, really, everyone's going to make mistakes, because as human beings, we don't have all the information available to make
Exactly.
a proper decision, you know. Yeah, that is a good book to read, and it's about 700 pages. I think it's really thick. It's a tome.
What's the name again?
Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit.
Okay.
And there's a chapter on identity as well, self-identity, and the problem with translocation, or what's the word? Not translocation. Your teleportation. That's it.
Yep.
There's a scenario about teleportation. If you
Mhm.
can make replicas of yourself and you send them to Mars, if the machine destroys yourself on Earth before the replica emerges, you think, okay, there's a continuity there, because that happens every 5 years with our bodies anyway. But then he gets you to imagine what would happen if the machine announced, right, your replica is now walking around safely on Mars, and now we're going to destroy you. Say there's a malfunction, and they fail to destroy your original self on Earth before the replica, right? So say they fail to do it properly, and instead they create the replica first, and then they destroy you. So he gets you to think, does that mean that the machine has just killed you, has committed murder? Does that mean that all of a sudden the replica isn't you, it's someone else that resembles you, like a bit like a twin or a clone? But then the clone would have all your memories. It would be an exact copy of you. It would have your DNA, all your memories, your physiognomy. It would have everything. It would even love your wife, right? It would believe itself to be you. But you on Earth, if you still exist at the same time as that copy, what's going on there? You know, so the book explores that implication. You know, what's going on there? It's really deep. So it's not just morality; it's also to do with the mystery of identity, mystery of self.
Which you remind me now of a show I've watched. It's also an anime called Guyver Bio Boosted Armor, and I think within like the first 5 episodes, the main character dies, but his consciousness, I guess you could say, is within the control metal of like the bio armor that he uses, and so he comes back, and instead of just the typical shonen response of I'm just going to keep powering through this power of friendship or whatever, he has an entire mental breakdown of like, am I even me anymore? Because his original self technically died.
That's called an existential crisis.
Yeah. And then there's existential terror, existential angst.
I just love existentialism. That's a fun topic to explore. And I have a favorite movie that delves into the topic of existentialism and different philosophical schools of thought. It's called I Heart Huckabees. I believe it was like an independent film, but it had Mark Wahlberg, and I can't remember the name of the other actor, but he's been in quite a few movies, and they're pretty amusing in their roles, and it's a pretty good thought-provoking movie in my opinion. But with that, I'm gonna have to sign off. It was great being on the show, and
Nice
I
to
hope
meet you, Alex.
likewise, and I hope y'all have a good rest of the show, and I'll catch you
Yep.
later.
See
All right,
ya.
Alex, we'll talk to you
Take
later,
care.
buddy. Unfortunately, I got to cut the stream short too. I'm on call this weekend, so I'm just fielding calls, and I got to get up and do my job.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah,
It's been a pleasure.
yeah, man. Really nice
We've had
conversation.
Yeah, nice conversation, and so many things that come to mind, and it's like sometimes I don't even know where to start from. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just so many things that come up as we talk. That's my problem, really. It's like, oh my god,
Me too.
it's, uh,
I can't stay focused.
it's a jungle up here right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah.
man. Well, thanks for coming on through, Caleb, as well, and Orlando. Really great having you guys, and everybody who's in the live chat. Thanks for participating. And if you're new here, like and subscribe. Let's grow the community, and we're going to continue the conversations. And yeah, until next weekend, man, we will reconvene.
All
Y'all
right.
have a good one.
You
Take
too.
care, Caleb. Take care, Scott.
All right,
See
man.
you guys.
You guys be good.
Yep. You too.
Yeah.
You too.